Perfect. So we should have everyone in. We're just waiting for Ankit to come up. Oh, perfect. He's joined. So yeah, obviously people will continue to join in as the Twitter space goes on. And it's 5 p.m. here in the UK, so I know quite a few people like to listen after they finish work. So why don't we kick things off with something light and easy? Quick round of introductions of who you are and what you're building in the space. We'll start with yourself, Connor, as you're the first to join, and then we'll go around to Arjun, Trojan Horse, and then are you doxed? You can say your name if you're not doxed already. But yeah, we'll start with yourself, Connor.
Sure, I'm Connor Howe, one of the co-founders of Enso. I've been building full-time in the Ethereum ecosystem since 2016. You can envision Enso as an intent engine, meaning we're able to solve many different types of intents. Our vision of intents are not only limited to orders, i.e. limit orders, but also DeFi, NFTs, any arbitrary smart contract interaction. And we enable developers to interact on-chain very easily.
Nice, very well articulated. Arjun?
Awesome. Yeah, it's weird to go back to doing these Twitter spaces with y'all after doing in-person panels just a week ago in Brussels. But yeah, hi everyone, I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Everclear. We were previously known as Connext. Everclear is what we call the first clearing layer. It coordinates the global settlement of liquidity between chains, basically solving the like rebalancing problem for intent solvers. As intent solvers make transactions happen across chains, their liquidity gets their own liquidity ends up getting fragmented. And Everclear is a system that helps them basically find coincidences of once with each other to minimize the need for rebalancing to occur in the first place. This massively improves solver economics and allows for a lot more people to run solvers beyond just like large scale market makers that have, large operational teams to manage inventory.
Nice. I'll pass the mic over to Alex from Fastlane.
Hey guys, my name's Alex, aka Thogard. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Fastlane. We do smart contract-based sequencing for validators and apps, depending on who the intended beneficiaries are. Before that, I actually was a searcher / solver myself. And yeah, I think I've been around since 2020-ish, so relatively new to the scene, but it's been having a lot of fun building in this space.
Nice. And second to last, Vishwa.
Hey guys, good to hang out with everyone again after Brussels. My name is Vishwa, co-founder and CEO at Anera Labs. We're building sort of a cross-chain liquidity layer that allows us to make Ethereum composable without having to change anything at the sequencer layer. More details to come on Anera protocol, but for now we have a in-production cross-chain intent solver that's active on multiple intent-based bridges. And excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Finally, last but not least, the man himself, Ankit.
Hello, I do research at Frontier, lead research at Frontier. A few months ago, we wrote this thing called Cake Framework around chain abstraction, what it means, and what are the different layers of the cake. And more recently, we've been working at something called One Balance, which is a new type of account model for making instantaneous cross-chain transactions. And excited to talk to with everyone around that.
Perfect. So as you guys listening in probably already know from the title, we are going to be deep diving into solver networks and their role, what they build and how they will help with the cross-chain abstraction future, chain abstraction future. But before we kick into that, you guys have all heard that ECC was last week. There have been many different hot takes, so I thought we'll just do a quick round and a quick 10 seconds on what was the hottest topic that was coming out of ECC last week. We'll start with yourself, Connor.
Am I always going to be first? Okay. Hot topic. Need more apps, less infra. People are building infra that nobody's using. It's infra upon infra. I think that's kind of my spicy and hot take.
Nice. We won't force any speakers, but I'll quickly say if anyone else has a hot topic, speak now.
So we actually hosted an event called Unaligned Day. We had big turnout. The focus was on saying unaligned things, though. So we had pretty much nothing but spicy takes. I think the spiciest was when one of the presenters said that Justin Drake should resign, which I then argued against, but it was extremely spicy. Yeah, don't miss it next time, guys. It was amazing.
Whoa, I'm gonna have to jump in here. Who's calling for Justin Drake's resignation, and what was the context?
We treat Unaligned Day Chatham House rules, so we cannot divulge that.
Fair enough. Arjun, I know you're keen to. I'll let you jump in there.
Oh, yeah. I guess two quick ones. One, there were a lot of duplicated events. We can't solve fragmentation in user experience if we can't solve fragmentation in our events. So we should all consolidate and actually just do one single event, so we're not all on the same panel over and over again. And then other than that, I think in general, like, it was very clear that like chain abstraction intents is like one of the biggest and most important topics this time around. And so that's honestly, like, congratulations to everybody here for pushing that, right? Everyone here has been talking about this new change, and it's awesome that this whole space is now paying attention to it.
Nice. Now, something a little controversial. Oh, sorry, Vishwa, did I cut you off there?
No, I was just gonna say, hard to follow Alex's Unaligned Day spice. That's as spicy as it gets. But there was another interesting one at the Sorella event where Joshua from Aori, I don't know if you guys have ever seen him speak, but he's awesome and he's super spicy. He said to Ken from Uniswap that within the next 2 years, there will not be any significant volume going through AMMs for short tail tokens. And I think he said there would be no volume, and then they kind of took a bet on that on a panel, which I thought was kind of spicy.
What do you mean by short tail tokens?
Your
Not
blue
long
chip
tail.
ones. Yeah. ETH, USDC, stable assets, and deep liquidity tokens.
Which is kind of true, no?
Yeah, I agree. But it was just funny to see the sort of AMM versus order book debate raging on from, I don't know, I guess Doug Colgate and Dan Robinson on season 6 of was it what podcast was that? Bell Curve? Yeah, that was sort of like, fun to see it IRL.
I mean, I'd push back. I don't think that's true. I think that the people that think that tend to not have a firm understanding of like some of the MEV limitations of on-chain limit order books. I think that if you're routing everything through off-chain, you know what? No, I'm gonna tone down the spice. I'm starting off way too strong.
I was just gonna say.
No, I like it. I like it.
Sorry. I'm still in Brussels mode. I'm still in Brussels mode.
This
Man.
is not Unaligned Day. You just spun out a breakout panel right now.
Oh man, yeah.
On-chain
No, I
clouds
was in a bunch of debates too in Brussels. Oh man.
I would love to debate this, by the way. If we have spare time at the end of this, we should definitely get into it.
I'm down. I think like my point is not that AMMs are good. It's just that central limit order books, if they're on chain, suffer like pretty much the exact same problems.
But I think that's not the assumption,
so
right?
we close this.
But wait, one last thing.
exactly.
That's not the assumption, right? It's not saying that it's just order books. It's saying that most of the routing will not be done fully on chain for the main assets. It'll be mainly RFQs, mainly market makers as well.
Yes, it's off-chain order book, basically, like an off-chain high-frequency order book, not an on-chain club.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess if we don't care about decentralization anymore, then sure. But let's not go there.
It's not really decentralized, no.
This might get a little bit spicy. So I'm going to put a pin in this because I actually am quite keen to explore all your thoughts around this. But for the newcomers who are coming to the space who don't know much about chain abstraction, could you give Solver's role within chain abstraction? Could you give a quick 30-second pitch, Arjun?
Oh, yeah. So chain abstraction is this overarching kind of vision or outcome that this ecosystem is like coalescing around, which is that users should not really need to know or care what chain they're on. And it's not to say they can't know or care what chain they're on, but they shouldn't need to. So like today, when you use an application in Web 2, like YouTube, you don't need to know or care how it's built in the background. And I think the same thing needs to apply to applications if we want them to be used by like every single possible person out there. And then how that happens in practice, there's a lot of different like ways to kind of approach that problem, but the dominant paradigm right now centers around intents. And basically here, intents being a design pattern where users specify an outcome that they want, and then an open market of what are called solvers, service providers, compete to fulfill that outcome. So a good kind of analogy here is to like Uber, where you as a user specify, the outcome I want is to get to the airport, and then Uber basically finds you the cheapest, fastest driver to get there. Yeah, let me know if anyone else has anything else that I missed.
That was a great analogy. I've never heard it being compared to Uber before.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I think is interesting to think about is, does chain abstraction have to be intent-based? I've always operated under the assumption that chain abstraction really is more of a UX or a user experience paradigm, which is where we build these apps, we build these interfaces in such a way that users don't really know which chain they're on, nor do they need to. And that's where things like one balance can become so powerful, just by showing one balance on all chains. But I don't think that necessitates an intent-based flow. If anything, I would strongly argue that intents are apps themselves, really. And I think that a true next generation chain abstraction user experience would be one where users can interact with any app, any front end, without having to worry about which chain they're on, and without having to do it through some sort of middle party, fulfilling an intent, but rather directly and expressly, declaratively saying, hey, this is the app I want to work with. I just don't care what chain I'm on.
So I think we could probably, I don't know if it's helpful to kind of get into weeds here, but yeah, I agree that I don't think that, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit in the like Cake group, for instance, where I don't think that chain abstraction has to necessarily be done through intents. There are examples of chain abstracted applications today that don't use intents. However, I think the experience that you're describing, Alex, is like one where, let's assume certain constraints, right? So one important constraint is that any interchain communication that happens today needs to be secured by something. And if there's really one of two options, you can either have it be secured by consensus in a consensus set, which is how bridges work, or you can have it basically be secured by this two-party bilateral relationship, which is how intents work. And generally what we found is that the former option is just too expensive to be used very frequently at scale. And so,
or even slow, or even very slow.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just, there's this it's really the blockchain scalability trilemma, right? The more secure you make this thing, the more expensive it's going to be. And so I think there's a certain trade-off space where, it might actually still make sense to go in a different direction. So for example, a counterexample is chain abstracting applications that actually live on Ethereum, where you likely don't want to actually make intent-based transfers to Ethereum for every single transaction. And so in that model, a good chain abstracted application could be something like Renzo, where this is something that we did with them, where what they were doing was basically just providing an interface and liquidity pools on L2, and then in the background, like rebalancing everything to L1 to actually interact with the L1 app. That's like, it's a way to like amortize the L1 gas costs. And it's a model that kind of looks similar to like, if folks here are like familiar with like the old Aztec rollup mechanism where they were just like batching a bunch of stuff on a rollup and then submitting it all in a batch to L1. But then for any like L2 to L2 interactions, the gas cost is like cheap enough that it is oftentimes just going to be way, way, way more cost effective to just use an intent. But it's a really complex space, so like it's definitely worth discussing more.
Yeah, it's certainly complex, and I definitely agree completely that using intents is one of the more intuitive approaches to handle it. I wouldn't want us to limit ourselves just to that.
I mean, an intent
Yeah, for sure.
purely is just a request, right? It's like going to a job bulletin board. I want this job to be done. This is how much I'm going to be paid. So it doesn't need to exclusively be with intents. I think intents is a good step in the right direction. Underneath, I think is what we need to care about a lot more. Everyone can build an intent network. It's not that inherently that complex. It's the back end handling different requests and then people submitting their call data. I think to answer your question, where do solvers come into this? Now, if we start entering this chain abstraction future, most solvers today are only doing same chain. We're on CowSwap, we're on a couple of other networks, and we're primarily doing same chain. For cross-chain itself, that's a whole different skill set. So you're not just routing from certain liquidity pools, certain DeFi protocols. You're now going to start needing to manage inventory. So you'll need to have X, I don't know, let's say 500K across maybe 50 different chains. And then what happens if there's a new chain that pops up that no solver really wants to take exposure on that chain itself, but they can get higher fees for doing this. So I start to see this merge between solvers and market makers, but not in the way of a solver becoming a market maker, but a solver and a market maker collaborating, i.e. the market maker like RockawayX, where the main guys underneath dBridge, they would handle all of the inventory management, and then they would use ENSO, for example, for doing USDC to whatever verbose asset it may be on the second chain, right? So solvers are now entering this different game of inventory management, it seems.
Got it. I would like to understand how do you differentiate between solvers and market makers? Is that one holds inventory and one does not?
Pretty
And
much, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
8 months ago, all the solvers, we were all talking with each other and we all thought we were going to we were going to have our own inventory. But then over time, we all decided, no, we'll just plug into RFQ providers. We'll just get close relationships with market makers. But I think Trojan Horse is a cross-chain solver, so knows a lot more about this than I do.
Yeah. Thanks for butchering my my tongue-in-cheek name. It's Trojan Horse,
Sorry.
and I worked really
Sorry,
hard on
man.
coming up with my Anon identity. It doesn't have a story. I know Alex's name has way more of a story because it has something to do with the game. But yeah, I think the simplest sort of if you were to make a differentiation, I think solvers on a single chain have been used to particularly with CowSwap, and even going back to I think 1inch, it was about finding a price, and the idea was to sort of find the best price for the user with everything that was available on chain, and then sort of with CowSwap, it comes down to okay, finding the best clearing price, and so you net it out, and how you split a trade is a big factor in how you do that. Whereas with cross-chain stuff, it's about setting a price, and that's similar to RFQ, similar to market making, and how you sort of manage inventory, and your profitability on inventory holding cost is directly correlated with how you set a price. And so there's totally different sort of schools of thought. Cross-chain solving naturally tends towards not just market makers, but people that have been in inventory management teams of like e-commerce websites as well. They have an edge because this is sort of the kind of computation that they do on a day-to-day basis.
So I'd like to, since we want to add spice to this, I would like to push back strongly against this notion. And the evidence that I have is that Connext, as we were previously called prior to kind of repositioning as Everclear, was running like an intent-based bridge since 2021, and we've had like 30 to 50 solvers, though that's not necessarily what they called them or what they called themselves, live in production, holding inventory, routing transactions for years. None of these people are market makers. They are like funds that are putting capital passively into our system. They're staking service providers. They're individuals with large amounts of capital. They're like, whatever, right? They're basically like they're actors that are sophisticated enough to run infrastructure, but not sophisticated enough to manage inventory. And the reason that we've been able to work with them for this whole time is because in 2021, we kind of realized, okay, the only way to scale our system was going to be to figure out how to make solving or in our case, I mean, again, the solving term is so loaded, and I think that's where a lot of this like confusion comes from. But in order to make this activity of routing cross-chain intents completely passive, and I think that is possible, right? Like we can get to the point where the process of inventory management as a cross-chain solver is something that is entirely passive to the point where really anybody can do it. And I think we do need to get to that point if we want to make it so that the system can be opened up to like a much broader array of participants beyond just like, a network of like technology provider solvers that are then partnered up with market makers, of which there would really only be a few.
I'm going to double click on that. I come from the like MEV searcher side rather than the, I'm going to fulfill intent side, but the overlap in those two Venn diagrams is an almost perfect circle. And, one of the things that I think is just really, really important to understand to Arjun's point is that the types of entities that are really good at assessing finality risk and like, cross-chain inventory management, that's very different from on one hand, you've got a so-called market maker who is using their own inventory as a counterparty. But oftentimes this can also be fulfilled by your old school traditional searcher who is just really good at calculating the optimal routes on chain. And like one of the important things to think about is not just that these are two very different specialties that should in a truly, optimized environment be separated from each other, but they also have two very different costs of capital, right? If you're market making and you're one of the good ones, one of the worst things you can do is actually, lock up a whole bunch of your capital in some sort of bridge. That's especially if you lock up a big chunk of it, that you're going to have a bad time. The entire reason I built Fastlane is because I had some of my capital locked up when I was market making and Polygon crashed. And I was so frustrated. I was like, someone should build an MEV system. And so I did. But like the whole concept of just locking capital into a bridge is just antithesis to a big part of how, market makers work. And even just like needing a ton of capital is the antithesis for how many of the solvers who just do like, single chain route finding work. And I think to Arjun's point, one of the most exciting things, coming forwards is that there are a lot of bridges, including Arjun with Everclear, perhaps even like, led by, Arjun's Everclear, that really give a way to separate these two roles in a way that doesn't hurt UX and that doesn't, impute any sort of trust assumptions, but that still allows each of these two separate entities to fulfill these roles. Internally at Fastlane, we call them routing solvers and finality solvers. We don't really talk about this too much publicly, but yeah, I do think that they are two extremely different entities.
So to understand, like the same chain solver is someone who would optimize EVM bytecode and find the best solution. And then the other entity who's holding inventory is taking on some risk and has to specialize on that. Are these the two specializations?
Yes, and you could put market makers into the first type as well, or even just call the first type market makers outright. Yeah. But I think like the key here with it, really, I want to dial in on that second type, which is the finality solvers. And I want to emphasize that it's not just about inventory management. It's not just about tracking inventory and moving inventory around. It's about being an actual expert on the consensus mechanisms and on the finality proofs and time to finality and liveness of each of the chains that you're operating on. And that is an extremely, extremely heavy skill set for someone to take on if they want to win.
Yeah, and just like double clicking on that point, especially with the nature of the current auctions for intent-based bridges, most of how you win an order is a foot race, right? So you can have sort of the inventory management and internal price and profitability calculations on which orders you'll take and which orders you won't take, but ultimately the way you sort of win these orders is depending on which chain. For example, if it's L1, then you still need to know consensus and how blocks are built. If it's a competitive auction, if you have multiple solvers, you need to figure out like how is my fill transaction to fill a particular user's intent going to be before the other people. And then there's sort of a risk that you take on over there, which is if you look at default solvers for across or DLN, they're sort of built in with 8 block confirmations, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas if you look at the nature of the orders that are actually being filled, it's often just like a single block confirmation and somebody's taking on that risk and saying, hey, I think the risk reward for me to only wait 1 block confirmation and the potential for a reorg of an L2 or even on the L1 is something that I'm willing to take on to fill this order. So absolutely agree, and that comes in again from like I think the similarities in market making land around latency optimizations and infrastructure there. The microstructure of the game for cross-chain solvers is now also headed in that direction. So the inventory management is one aspect, but you also need to be fast and you need to know how to price risk reward for finality for sure.
Nice. I'm just going to interrupt for a second. We're actually joined by Philip from Li-Fi. I'm not sure if you had your moment to introduce Li-Fi, but quickly introduce yourself and Li-Fi and then carry on with the conversation because I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, sure. Hey, thanks for having me. Li-Fi is a multi-chain liquidity aggregator that has the mission to essentially take care of all that fragmented infrastructure and liquidity and help enterprise companies, especially those that come from above and that live multi-chain from day one, to actually be able to enter the space without being overwhelmed with the short innovation cycles we're experiencing right now, especially in that chain abstraction narrative. So that's how we are positioned. And as many of you know, we are right now facing some issues, but we are on it and very optimistic that things are working out well.
Wait, hold up. Did you say it's pronounced Li-Fi?
Yeah, I know. That's been an ongoing discussion for 3 years now.
Oh my God,
so
my entire life is a lie.
It's short for linked finance. That's what it derives from, and that's why we said Li-Fi all the time. But obviously, especially the Americans are always like Li-Fi. So by now, like we have accepted that we will not be able to, establish Li-Fi, but I'm still gonna call it like that. Yeah, both is fine.
Nice. And to bring it back to the previous conversation, what were your thoughts on it?
The thoughts on solvers and what is a solver and what is a market maker? Well, I mean, like a very easy way to distinguish would be if they're holding inventory or not. But I believe that the term solver will greatly progress over time as they have to become more competitive. I do believe many of them will start building up inventory just to have liquidity available, and in order to be more competitive, that it's going to be a necessity. And then also, if you take a look at products like Kalani network, right? In Kalani, ecosystems can simply host their own solvers. They call it solvers too, and they're going to have inventory to allow to bridge to their chain. So then again, I think the term solver is used in a variety of use cases and therefore can have different properties. And then
controversial opinion.
You can also throw in the word paymaster on top, right? What's the difference between a paymaster and a market maker? A paymaster and the market maker hold inventory essentially. And then I recently made the argument that the paymaster is a dumb version of a solver. And then I heard complaints from others in the chain abstraction space. Paymasters don't have to be dumb. Right? So yeah, I think it's yeah. But Arjun, what's your take on that?
Well, I was actually going to follow on that, and so I'm glad that you brought this up, which is like we had a great like panel. I can't remember what the panel was originally called. I think it was called like transaction supply chain composability, which didn't really mean anything to any of the panelists in Brussels. But yeah, I think Rojan Tors and I and a few others, I think Stefan from One Balance was moderating. We ended up getting into this very interesting discussion around like, well, what is a solver? And I liked, it seems like through the course of that panel, we kind of came to the same conclusion, which is like, there is a host of activities like services that are needed, that are like purchasable as part of an intent, right? And those activities involve like computing some optimal pathway, or providing gas on a given chain, or providing inventory to complete a transaction across chains, or a bunch of other things, right? And like this host of activities,
or sequencing blocks.
Exactly, or sequencing blocks, or yeah, I don't know. There's honestly a bunch of other things I can't remember off the top of my head, but
I think we call a block sequencer a sequencer, not a solver. You guys are killing me.
Well, technically, these are all kind of like service providers that you're interacting with, and like paying to interact with to provide some sort of service as part of the actual transaction supply chain, right? And like, I think that, you know, ultimately, why have we called these things solvers, or why are we calling more and more of these things solvers? It's because like the MEV term of solvers really won out against like the paymaster term, or the relayer term, or the like market maker term, or the, you know, whatever else, like router, or whatever else that people have been calling it over the years. But ultimately, these are, one way to think about it is that these are all kind of categories of the same thing. And so you can have all of these different service providers, and as part of a single intent, you should be able to like specify the need for each of these different services, and these services should kind of compose against one another. Now, I think some of these services are certainly more like defensible than others. I have a secondary controversial take here, which is that I think that like compute-based solving, so like single chain solving, for example, is going to disappear as soon as GPT-5 is out. I don't really see a reason why that whole opportunity doesn't get completely automated.
Oh, I'll take the other side of that bet.
Yeah, I'm actually very curious to hear arguments against it, but yeah, like, but yeah, there's just basically like different kinds of ways in which we can like simplify these services, right? And we can kind of abstract them away so that like either they're more democratized and more people can participate in them, or they are something that becomes just a commodity resource. But ultimately, like it's kind of part and parcel of the same like ultimate relationship between a user, a desired end state, and like a set of service providers, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think like there seems to be this trend where it's kind of like, hey, here's this, you know, we need someone to do a thing, and this is a new thing. We didn't have a name for it before, so let's just call them a solver. You know, it's kind of like yeah, that makes sense, but like at the same time, you know, it's not like I go to the, you know, grocery store every day, and the person who adds up the cost of all my groceries, like the cashier register, is like a solver, right? Like that's a cashier register. That's not a solver. And I think that like the solver,
but you're not paying them
umbrella,
directly for the service.
I mean, like, we're not paying solvers directly for many of these like things that people are solving either. But I'm just trying to say that like at the end of the day, I do think that like right now some like solver has become an umbrella term. You know, much to your point. I think that the only thing I would push back on is like, you know, some of these you know, terms or words have, you know, very explicit definitions already. And I think it's in my mind, it's okay to say that like, yes, market makers might be a type of solver. The one thing that I'm worried about is when we start saying that all solvers are market makers. You know, I think as long as we treat solver as an umbrella definition, I think that's okay. It's when we start going the other direction that it becomes a problem and things start to lose their distinction.
I agree in this
And
Yeah, I
one.
mean, I'm
the
down to
timeline that we'll
collectively.
just-
I'm very down to collectively decide on a better umbrella term, by the way. Like I don't personally like the solver term for the exact same reason, which is that like you talk to different people in different groups or different camps in the space, and the term just means totally different things. And so nobody seems to be able to like agree on like a shared baseline of knowledge. And it's quite confusing.
We should probably not
honestly,
differentiate.
it's too late. It's too late for solver. I'm just trying to protect market maker. I swear to God, if you guys start calling paymasters market makers, oh, I swear to God.
I mean, we've done, what, 40 minutes talking about definitions, and maybe we could just get over it and talk about
One more thing to
technicals.
add here, though. One more thing to add. We should probably not differentiate between properties and capabilities, but just by function.
Yeah, but why are we all getting so caught up in definitions for like so long?
Because the space is so confusing for people to pick it up, you know. It gets hard to communicate. I've seen so many pitch decks recently around chain abstraction and like arbitrary usages of different terms and words. It really becomes confusing, and you know, we are far away from building out standards. And that's what we actually need to do in order to grow as an ecosystem, right? So, and standards, unfortunately, start by finding common, like some terms we can agree on what is what. And then we need to also make a decision on how do we derive there. And I think by function versus by capabilities or properties is probably a good way to start. So we can differentiate because, you know, like a paymaster has inventory like a market maker, but a market maker absolutely has a different function than a paymaster. So
no, I disagree about whether or not we need to pick definitions. So
Okay, let's come back.
just playing. I'm just playing. No, but anyway, let's continue with the panel. We can do the definition stuff offline like we always do every week. I actually have a calendar invite to remind me to argue about the definition of intents at least once a week.
I'll join you on that one. Yeah, me
I
too.
won't.
I will moderate because I have no skin in the definition game.
You're a solver
Have
of
you guys seen
intents,
this?
huh?
Have you guys seen
Yes.
this XKCD comic panel where everyone tries to come up with a new standard? It's the same thing with the definitions, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think we're all building the same thing, talking about the same thing, and hosting the same events that talk about the same thing all the time. I think like that's the meta for this is the ultimate nerd snipe of all nerd snipes. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I see why, and I think it's also important because just double clicking on what Philip said earlier, I think there's one which is like the usage of various names for various functions, but the other which is on sort of like people that are building applications, and some of them are building applications on a single chain, some of them are building it on across domains. It becomes hard for them to actually find who they're looking for to solve their problems. And I think having a glossary of people or entities or protocols that can solve specific functional problems for applications is a good starting point. And maybe we should all, the ROI from this panel is that we come up with a glossary so that if there's anybody that's building an application, and we can sort of like assign roles by function so that those applications can come to the right people for the help that they need.
We've already started this. It's called Intent Collective. We have a full directory of all different players within the intent ecosystem. So you can simply just do a PR, define your own category if you think that's relevant to you, and then people can go there and see what projects to use. I think on this concept of definitions, since we're still in this topic,
but we don't have to be. We can move on. We have the power.
I know. One last thing. I have a lot of passion around what an intent description should be. And maybe some people can see it in some Telegram chats. You know, I don't think an intent should be quantified in a mathematical equation. It should be very humanly understandable. What we found that actually worked, instead of trying the let's get everyone to agree on this, was just here's our definition. And if people identify with it, many people start to do that. And we notice many competitors of ours starting to copy our definition to now start to create it as standard so they identify with it. Just off topic.
And just for the listeners, could you clarify the definition?
I want A, B, and C, and I don't care how you get it for me. That's an intent.
Beautifully spoken. An interesting topic that I heard that was coming up more and more at ETC is centralization of solvers. I'd love to hear your take on it. If, as time goes on, do solvers get more and more centralized, or do you think it will happen in the opposite fashion?
I think they have to become more centralized. It's a matter. So what we are seeing after having worked with a bunch of solvers is so solvers are able to provide more competitive prices the more liquidity sources they can consult. That though takes a lot of time. So while you might be able to tap into 300 liquidity sources and you're going to get the best price, it takes you 15 seconds to get there. And that's a huge problem. So ultimately, you would want to optimize this process and that's how I see the server space evolving until we have a smart enough AI. They're gonna start specializing on certain routes, environments, or trade pairs. And for that, you want to collect as much historical data as possible, and then really understand those specific liquidity sources, and reduce the amount of liquidity sources you have to keep track on in real time, essentially, and make approximations on price changes, and really specialize on that, and excel in these certain niches, so to say. That's how I'm going to see the solver space playing out in the case that we actually see a huge surge in solvers coming up. If that actually happens, for them to remain competitive, they have to specialize heavily. And for that, they need to centralize, because otherwise they're not going to be fast enough. If it takes you 15 seconds to get a competitive quote, no chance. It has to be sub-second.
So I think if you're asking, are the solvers going to run, centralized infra, then yeah, obviously. But I think like what you might actually be asking is, is the solver market going to, centralize around like monopolies or, oligopolies? And I think the answer is yes. And I'm also not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing. Tarun's paper on, the externalities of asset contention. I don't remember the exact title, but the TLDR was you have too many permissionless solvers fighting over assets. That raises the cost of capital. It raises the acquisition cost for pretty much all of them. And so there can actually be some benefits to having like an oligopoly. Like anywhere from 3 to 10 solvers. And I think that is not necessarily a bad thing. I think we'll see that more with the with the shorter tail assets. Longer tail assets tend to be not things that solvers of the market maker variant hold in inventory due to their inability to hedge those assets. So I think we're still going to see like a wide, virtually uncapped number of solvers handling routing for long tail assets. But for the short tail stuff, I do think we will start to see oligopoly forces congealing. One of the things that I think is really, really key here, though, is that while yes, there might just be a handful of solvers who are able to do market making on short tail assets profitably, that doesn't mean that the barriers to entry for a new solver should be high. And I think as we're building these protocols, one of the things we should keep in mind is like as we're building them, let's try to avoid ways that there could be regulatory capture or any other sort of mechanism that actors could use to entrench themselves. Because I think even if there is just 7 or 8 or 3 solvers that are fulfilling most of the short tail asset market making, if a year from now it's 3 totally different entities because we make it easy for a solver that's even just marginally better to come in and take over the slot of one of the existing ones, then I think that's fine. And not even just fine, but good. Like not everyone needs a gold medal, but I do think that as we go forward, we should make sure that everyone gets a chance to compete for it.
So I don't know if I completely agree with that take. And I think the reason that I don't agree with that take is because, well, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons. First off, I read Turn's paper as well. I think that there are like certain limitations to that analysis, largely that it's like looking at like existing solver dynamics and like not necessarily the way that this is like changing over time, especially as we head into like both a cross-chain world and also a world with many, many more chains. And I think that like the hypothesis that like all new chains are going to be long tail is also very incorrect, right? Like I think we're starting to see an increasing rate of like applications becoming chains themselves, and those applications being like the primary drivers of volume and traction for larger ecosystems that exist today. And so I think like there's an interesting question around like, well, if there's 3 to 10 solvers, how are they going to service like potentially hundreds or thousands of application specific chains?
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
I think like finality, like to your point, 100% yes. Sorry for interrupting. I want to make sure I am properly like describing. I view that the finality type of solving, like bridging, 100% agree with you. I think that will be extremely like fractured. I'm specifically referring to like routing and market making. I think you are 100% right about any sort of solving that involves finality. Just because, yeah, new chain, new consensus protocol, new risk, new finality system. Yeah, 100% agree with you.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, beyond that, like I personally don't see a way for us to be able to I think like the notion that you can have, like, for example, if you have solvers that are providing data, you can have, it doesn't really matter too much if that's super centralized. I think I agree with that notion because there's ways to kind of like verify the integrity of that data and things like that over time. So you could just have like a small number of providers like running that in an automated way, potentially using machine learning models to like optimize outputs as much as possible. But I think for like solvers that are more explicitly performing activities like making transactions happen across chains using inventory, we really, this space like massively benefits from having as much decentralization as possible there, because that is probably going to be one of the largest like potential centralization or censorship like vectors for like interacting with any application. And so if we want to allow for like a paradigm where you're not like, getting like blocked from interacting with the Uniswap application because you're trying to trade a token, like Uniswap's app chain, because you're trying to trade a token that like isn't actually supported in your region under the laws that you're operating under, or something like that. Like I think like we are going to have to kind of make sure that this system and this ecosystem is as decentralized as possible.
Right, but I think that decentralization, and this I think might just go back to maybe the vagueness of the question, but I think that decentralization is on, like the burden of that is on the builders of, bridges and the protocols, not necessarily the solvers themselves. I think they just don't really care as long as they're making money and as long as they trust it. To your point though, I do think that solvers are going to be more likely to trust decentralized systems. And I think that in an efficient world, which we're definitely not in right now, but in an efficient world, I do think that would manifest in some way as some sort of credit or decreased spread paid to the solver.
Well, I mean, I'm the reason I bring it up is because, like, for example, there are open questions around, for instance, like, are builders money service businesses, right? They have transaction introspection, and because they can potentially rearrange the ways that blocks are built in order to extract value. And according to like new European definitions of what an MSB is, if they have the capacity to introspect a block and earn profit from it, then by definition they are a money service business, right? And so like in the past, miners or validators were not MSBs because they were just processing blocks. And like I think the same kind of thing happens with a solver, where like, well, if the solver has the capacity to earn from this activity, then in theory there is a potential risk here. And that's something that I think is like a very interesting open question for this space that I think really like only like makes sense or is a potential risk for the entire space, right? And it's something where like if people are able to run solvers from anywhere, there is like a pathway towards having builders or solvers or other kinds of like infrastructure providers in this ecosystem be able to like participate from other countries and other regions. But if it is like kind of like a pay to play game where only the largest 5 people can do it, then I think we end up in like pretty serious regulatory hot water in general for the entire ecosystem.
Agreed. I think that, if it is just 5 people doing it, that's fine. I think that if it becomes pay to play, that is not fine. It should be the 5 best entities doing it. It shouldn't be, and the reason why that is, I mean, like, even if you just look at NEV, right? If you start a searcher bot or any solver of any kind, if you're not generating revenue, like the infrastructure's not cheap, you're on fast boxes, right? Bare metal all over the world. You're not going to run just one, box. And if you're not making any money, you're going to turn the thing off, right? And I think that like there's this, extra cost that we see with like, market making and stuff. And yeah, I do think that we're not going to see inside of just the, intra-chain, not inter, but just intra-chain market making space. I don't think we're going to see too many solvers competing. But I think, yeah, just going back to my main point, as long as the barriers to entry are low or non-existent, then I think that'll be fine, because then someone, from some, non-mainstream area could come in, and if they are the best, then they can win. And I think that we want to preserve that while still accepting that maybe not everyone gets to, get a gold medal in the solving Olympics.
But suppose in the case of cross-chain, when you need to have when you need solvers which hold inventory on both the chains, won't that increase the amount of capital you need to put into to start playing the game? And that increases the cost of
I think
playing
that's
the
a
game,
solvable
basically.
problem. I think that's a solvable problem. I think like Arjun is working on something to solve that. I feel like you guys are working on something to solve that. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like, yeah, to an extent, yes, it'll always be there, but I think it's something that a lot of teams have that in their sights as another, issue to try to handle.
Yeah, to be clear though, like without something like Everclear or some mechanism to like automate solver inventory management, like that is 100% the largest centralization vector. Right? Like managing inventory, and we have like data for over years to show this, where like managing inventory was the #1 thing that that active solvers running live in production making money were just like not willing to do, because it just takes a lot of time. It's super complex. Even if it's like it happening in a profitable way, it's like the operational complexity of it is just too high.
To answer the question on centralization, I think it's already happened. You've got Copium Capital has got around 30.86% of all the orders in CowSwap, and then the rest distributed mostly evenly between all the different solvers. Why? He's very, very specialized in one thing. He only does CowSwap. He doesn't want to do anything else, right? With us, we specialize in DeFi, so we're the only ones doing DeFi there, and then we can charge any arbitrary fees. Where do I kind of see this ecosystem going? I think there's going to be more centralization purely just to capitalism. Like, why would you share your profits with other people if you can generate all these profits for yourself? I think we'll start seeing more systems in a way of collaborative solving, but not like purely profit sharing. So more like, if you do X part, I do Y part, and I wasn't doing X, then we can share that profit. And then the person doing Y will eventually just do X, and it'll be this race to the bottom between these people. If this is also a decentralized network itself, such as let's say a Cosmos chain or whatever it may be, then you also get this geo redundancy against, I don't know, OFAC compliance, regulations, and so forth. And you'll need to start attacking all of the nodes themselves to bring down this one master solver. They can do all of these different actions. So you're going to see centralization on certain specialties. You're going to see certain collaborative parts, but not really. It's more, hey, I'll do this part, you do that part in a shared environment, and then they'll start competing against each other to push each other out. And then the network itself can live standalone. So you can't have politicians or governments trying to take down these solver systems.
Nice. So we're getting close to our time here. So we'll quickly do a final round of thoughts and something exciting that's happening to your own project within the next 12 months, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you want to start with yourself, Connor?
Sure. So we'll be releasing our own network. It's a Cosmos-based network, enabling more anyone to contribute to our solver. So you can envision this as a master solver, where anyone can build an action. An action could be a DeFi protocol, an NFT, any arbitrary smart contract call, and then add this to what we call a shared graph. And then graphers are the second network participant that will then take the intent request, traverse all the individual hops and actions on the chain itself, and then generate call data. So this will be launching in the next couple of months, and it'll help us propel intents even further than just swaps, but for any smart contract interaction on any blockchain framework.
Nice. We'll pass on to yourself, Philip.
Sure, yeah. So for LeFi, it's exciting. We started leaving the EVM beginning this year and starting added support for Solana and also Bitcoin. So we're going to further on focus on that, expanding to other non-EVM ecosystems, while keep on expanding to new upcoming 2s or 3s in the EVM space, but also working on intent flow. So that we can support intent flow or intent style execution, and that again unlocks new markets for us. So I'm super excited about that. And yeah, that's the major part, I guess.
Nice. Alex, do you want to follow?
Yeah, so I think a lot of teams are in this space working on some like really interesting things. I'm just gonna be really direct about a feature that I'm really excited about, which is cross-chain shitcoin to shitcoin sub-second quotes for the users to see. We've spent a lot of time working on like different aspects of solving and intent, etc. We've made the permissionless solver network. We've made like cross-party flash loans. We've made all these really cool things. But if I'm being honest, like the hardest problem that we've solved is also arguably the silliest. Cross-chain shitcoin to shitcoin sub-second quotes for users.
Nice. Vishwa, do you want to get close to ending, and then we'll finalize with Ankit?
Yeah, sorry, I've just had a little bit of trouble with the Wi-Fi in the office. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, crystal clear.
Awesome. Yeah, for us over the next few months, it's about ramping up, multi-protocol support. As a cross-chain solver, this size of order flow is only getting bigger. With Uniswap X cross-chain coming in as well, it's exciting to see this market is growing. But then I think more exciting than that is just we are working on a Nera protocol actively, and in the process of designing it. So should have a spec up for folks over here to share, get their feedback, and then yeah, hopefully when we announce what a Nera protocol is doing in more detail, that should be a pretty exciting announcement towards the end of the year.
Nice. I nearly forgot about yourself, Arjun. But you know what they say, best till last.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, from our side, I did end up getting a chance to speak about Everclear. And so, yeah, I think for us, like the big next step is just getting to mainnet. We've been talking to just about every single intent-based like bridge and out there today, and then as a bunch of other folks that are kind of going online soon, and we see everyone has the same problem, which is just like, how do we get more solvers? How do we get more solver liquidity? How can we expand to every chain? And this is ultimately what Everclear aims to facilitate. And so, yeah, from our side, like we're just really excited to support the development of other folks in this, like both on this space and in this ecosystem as we ramp up towards our mainnet launch later this quarter.
Perfect. Anything from yourself, Ankit, and then I'll wrap up.
Thanks a lot for coming, everyone. It was nice listening to you again in the period of 2 days. I met everyone at ECC, but at One Balance we are working on like an MVP dashboard app to basically give look and feel of how chain abstraction might look like when users don't see chains anymore, and it might be coming in a couple of months. So excited for that.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for listening in. If you have made it this far, a bit of alpha, head over to onebalance.io and get on the whitelist now. You can start building your account score. Not going to say what the account score's for, but yeah, early registration is only open for a limited amount of time. So head over to One Balance now. And yeah, thank you all for taking the time, and see you all soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Bye.
you.
So,
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye, all.
See you soon.